Hello viewers! Well, I didn't intend to make a video today being Sunday, May the 6th, but yesterday, that is Saturday, May the 5th, there was a branch visit for Canada, and the speaker was Gerrit Loesch, who is a governing body member, as many of you will know. He gave a talk, the theme of which was Keep Growing in Love. And I've been sent a clip from that talk of Gerrit trying to persuade young people not to pursue higher education. And I'm going to go through that clip and some of the arguments that Gerrit uses to stigmatize college and university. But before I do that, I want to show you a different clip. This is actually from one of my very first videos from the John Cedars channel. It's no longer on the John Cedars channel, it's now on a different channel that I set up. But this is one of the very first videos that I uploaded when I first started on YouTube. I can't remember the exact date, but it would have been around 2012 or 2013 when I uploaded this. It's basically a recording of one of Gerrit Loesch's talks, which I'm going to play for you now.
And to that end, we really want to be balanced in as to what we want to pursue in this system of things so shortly before the Great Tribulation. In one study, 200,000 in the US, 200,000 university students in 390 institutions were surveyed, and the result was that 71% admitted that they go to college for the money that they hope to earn after they finish. See? So most of the college students go for that reason, to have a higher living standard. Some go for the fame, but most go for the money. Sometimes the children wouldn't even go, but the parents push them to go. They want to be able to say, my son is a doctor. So is this really the thing to pursue this side of Armageddon? Now some have good motives. If they do, we will not judge them. It's a personal decision. Some pioneer throughout college, and they have good motives. But we have lost really too many to the world already. And so it is a kind of a danger. This reminds me of an experience that was mentioned in our literature about a young man that had a compulsory behavior. He was always forced to wash his hands many times a day. Just couldn't stop doing that. He hated himself so much for it that finally he decided to kill himself. He bought himself a gun and he pulled the trigger, and the bullet went through his head, but he survived. And some went to college and survived. Now this young man survived, and the bullet had hit this part of the brain that was responsible for his compulsory behavior. After he recovered, he was normal. So the question is, yes, he survived college. In that case, we can apply it to college. He survived that operation, the bullet operation. But would we recommend that to others? That's a different matter.
So there are two things I want you to remember from that clip I've just played. Firstly, there is the quoting of these statistics. About 71% of freshmen saying they wanted to attend college to make more money. And I also want you to remember the awful, outrageous, deeply inappropriate illustration about someone trying to cure obsessive compulsive disorder by firing a gun into their brain, and this being used, this story, which I have no way of corroborating, this story being used to compare wanting to go to college to some kind of mental illness. So those are the two things I want you to remember. We're now going to go into what was said literally yesterday at the branch visit in Canada. This is a recording from a friend of mine who shall remain nameless. My friend didn't manage to record the entire talk. I'm not really interested in what was said in the rest of the talk for reasons that will hopefully become clear. I'm most interested in what was said about higher education. And let's listen to the first clip.
Now, in connection with the world, yes, it says in the Bible we should not love the world. But there's things in the world some are attracted to, like higher education. Much of such education focuses on achieving financial security. But at the base of this pursuit is the spirit of materialism in most cases. A new high of 71% of freshmen in the United States, as far as universities is concerned, said that the reason for attending college was, quote, to make more money, unquote. The findings were compiled from questionnaires completed by over 200,000 freshmen in almost 400 institutions. Do we pray for Jehovah to give us the bread for the day and at the same time doubt that he will do so?
So yes, that was the first clip, and you'll have noticed I put a clip from an Awake article, Watching the World's Spiritual Goals Declining, and you will have seen, hopefully, that what Gerrit was saying, which is the same thing that he said in at least 2012, 2013, very possibly even earlier than that. What he was saying in both talks was basically just reading almost verbatim from this Awake magazine. Now, bear in mind that on the second occasion, Gerrit says that he is quoting new figures. So he's giving new information, apparently, to this audience in Canada. And you're looking at the Awake article and you're thinking, well, how new is this Awake article? Let me tell you, this is the Awake for 1988, May 22nd, on page 29. So Gerrit, and I'm not being unfair here, I am not mischaracterizing how he puts this. He stands in front of an audience in Canada. He tells this audience that if you're thinking of going to college or education, it's because you're being greedy. It's because you're being materialistic. It's because you have a love of money. To reinforce this black and white proclamation, he says, there's this new study. And he says a new high of 71% of freshmen said that their reason for attending college was to make more money. And he is reading a statistic that is, I do not exaggerate, 3 decades old. A 30-year-old statistic is being wheeled out in 2018 as though it's new, as though it's recent information, with the aim of manipulating young people to forego opportunities that will greatly assist them in pursuing a career and increasing their earning potential. This is shameful, and I was listening to the talk clip and I heard him say that 71%. I was thinking, I've heard that before, 71%, and of course I remembered where I'd heard it from. But apparently the governing body cannot help but regurgitate material when they do these branch visits. We've seen exactly the same thing with Tony Morris. He went to Rome. He told the Italians in Rome not to wear tight pants. He did the US branch visit, and he told the Americans, hey, I've got some exclusive counsel for those of you in America. You're not to wear tight pants. He then goes to Trinidad and says, you're never going to guess what your branch has asked me to tell you about. But, top of the list of concerns for you here in Trinidad is tight pants. These men can only just get fixated on a certain subject and then just keep going over it and over it and over it. And this, for me, is more evidence of that. So I wanted to present that. I think that alone is worthy of a video. But actually, some of the other stuff that Gerrit has to say about higher education is very disturbing and just blatantly nonsensical. So let's listen to a few more clips.
In many cases, it was not the youth that wanted to go to college, but the parents pushed them toward that. For some, it is kind of an old age insurance that when they get older or get into financial problems, then the rich children would be able to care for them, the older parents as well, they think, they hope. But if parents in their 40s now think of financial security for themselves through their children once the parents are older, like in their 60s or 70s, where is the attitude of living with the urgency of the time in mind? Where's the faith?
So Gerrit has just told, again, I don't know how many young people, we're talking potentially, I don't know, hundreds of young people in his audience, potentially thousands, because this is, after all, a branch visit intended for the country of Canada. So there's no telling how many young people he's addressing at this point. He is telling Canadian young Canadian Jehovah's Witnesses that if their parent wants them to go to college or university, there's probably an ulterior motive. Probably the parent is thinking, I want a nest egg for when I'm older. I'm going to give my child better earning potential so that they can look after me when I'm older. That apparently is the motive that parents have. I'm not exaggerating. That's what he's just said. And you can argue, oh, well, he said some parents. I'm sorry. I think we all know what we just heard and the tone with which it was given. Young people are here being encouraged to distrust their parents' motives if their parents are urging them to go to college or university. And speaking as a parent, my child is nowhere near the age of going to college or university. I will have no interest in her caring for me when I'm older. I'll just want her to be able to look after herself. I honestly, it's the furthest thing from my mind is, oh, well, when I'm really old, I will benefit from this. It doesn't even feature in the mental process there. It's purely a case of, I want what's best for my child. But these are the depths to which the governing body will sink in their efforts to force home their agenda of creating this dumbed down, subservient base of followers who aren't able to think for themselves, who are entirely dependent on them for their decision making. So before I get too wound up thinking about it, let's play the next clip.
What about Luke? Did he not have higher education as a medical doctor? Yes, but Luke did not encourage Christians to follow his example by becoming also a doctor. Evidently, Luke became a physician before he learned about the Christ. What about Paul? did he not also have higher education? Yes. The Apostle Paul had been educated at the feet of Gamaliel before he became a Christian, but he never encouraged others to follow that course.
I am. I haven't doctored this in any way. This is what he said, literally yesterday, in front of Canadian witnesses. His argument, one of his arguments against higher education, is that okay, yes, Luke was a doctor. Luke, as in we don't know who wrote the Gospels. If you look into this, we can't say for sure who the authors were of each of the Gospels. But Luke, as recorded in the Gospels, is supposed to have been a doctor. Paul is said to have been educated at the feet of Gamaliel. And so here you have these two examples, quite prominent examples in early Christianity of people who were well educated. And Gerrit's argument is, oh, well, number one, this is before they learned the truth. And number two, they never encouraged anyone else to pursue higher education. That, ladies and gentlemen, is quite simply a truth claim that Gerrit has absolutely no reason to make. Nobody can say whether or not, assuming there was a Luke or there was a Paul, and I personally believe there may well have been a Luke and a Paul, we have no way of knowing. I mean, what's written in the Bible, of what's recorded of what the Bible records them as saying, is not everything they have ever said. And therefore, Gerrit has no way of knowing whether at some point in their lives these men did encourage people to go to pursue higher learning. He has no way of knowing whether they did or didn't say that, but he asserts in this talk, again, by way of manipulating young witnesses not to go to college or university, he asserts something he cannot know, which is that Luke and Paul never encouraged others to go to pursue higher learning. I'll just leave that for you to ponder, and we'll listen to the next clip.
There's certain dangers involved with it. Whether you go to college or not may also diminish your faith, and whether you have the nearness of the great tribulation in mind. One fact is indisputable: the time left is reduced. 1 Corinthians 7:29. For all its presumed benefits, would 4 years or more in a university be the best use of that short remaining time?
So he says one fact is indisputable. It is indisputable. It's not to be contended or argued that the time left is reduced. And he says, and therefore, would you not agree that the best use of your remaining time before Armageddon comes and wipes out all non-Jehovah's Witnesses, everyone who doesn't follow me and my pals, wouldn't you agree that the best use of your time is not to go to a college or university? What's amazing is that Watchtower said pretty much the same thing back in 1969 in an Awake magazine. I will put the reference on the screen here so that you can look it up, which essentially said, if you went to college or university now being in 1969 when it was written, there's no way in the world you'll be able to finish your career before Armageddon comes. 1969. So therefore, isn't it better to put kingdom interests first? And they're saying exactly the same thing now. And all we need to do is look back in history at Watchtower's now long history of dissuading higher education, and we can see the stupidity and foolishness of this line of reasoning. It isn't indisputable that we're living in the end, that these are the last days. As I argued in a recent video, You could argue that you don't have to argue it. You can just say it. If you were going to pick a time in human history to be alive, ask yourself honestly, would you honestly pick another time in which to live than now? The world is slowly but surely improving. Yes, it takes a step back from time to time. Yes, there's still a long way to go, and many problems to fix that humanity faces, some of which may never be fully fixed. But one thing you can say with absolute certainty is that we are better off now than we were when the first Watchtower was printed, than when Russell and Rutherford were around telling people that the end was nigh. So I'm sorry, Gerrit, you cannot assert that it is indisputable that we are living in the time of the end.
Danger number 2. College environment fosters a spirit of independence. In addition, it might lead one to look down on others that have not had higher education, feeling superior to them. Graduates tend to look down on others that did not attend college. They think they know things better.
Just wow. I don't think I've ever heard a governing body member spout such nonsense in relation to higher education. This has got to be one of the most outrageous talks I've heard on this subject by a governing body member. That I'm not exaggerating. We're hearing extremely black and white reasoning, again, all intended to manipulate young minds. We've already heard it said that parents who want their children to go to college or university are doing it for ulterior motives to benefit them, so that when they're older, their kids can care for them. Now we're hearing that if someone goes to college or university, they will look down on others. They will be condescending and patronizing. They will think of themselves as superior to everyone else. Well, I'm sorry, Gerrit, but of everyone, of all the people in the world to issue that warning, you and your 7 pals are among the last people who have room to speak there. Because I can think of few things more condescending and patronizing than to say, I am a spokesperson. I am one of a number of spokespersons for God. I speak for him. I am part of his anointed channel of communication with mankind. And if you don't listen to what me and my pals say, if you believe and then stop believing, guess what? We're going to separate you from your family, because you ought to listen to us. And how dare you think independently, which is another thing he says. Oh, you don't want independent thinking. You don't want to be able to think for yourselves. You want us to do your thinking for you. And yet, in the same breath, he has the gall to lecture about being patronizing and condescending and saying that everyone who goes to college or university will end up being like that, will end up being like he is, essentially.
Danger number 3. Whether or not you go to college also shows the degree of your love for Jehovah. Jesus said, no one can slave for 2 masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will stick to the one and despise the other. You cannot slave for God and for riches. Matthew 6:24.
So we get this false dichotomy repeatedly in Watchtower propaganda, that this scripture gets wheeled out that you cannot slave for God and slave for riches. The reasoning or argumentation being that if you don't follow the governing body, if you don't follow Gerrit and his pals, guess what? You're greedy and materialistic and obsessed with money. It's either one or the other. Either you commit your life to doing everything that Gerrit and his pals tell you to do, or you're obsessed with wealth. It's either one or the other. That's a false dichotomy. Because I'll have you know, Gerrit, that you can stop being a Jehovah's Witness, or indeed never be a Jehovah's Witness, and not be obsessed with money, and not be obsessed with accumulating wealth. And how patronising and condescending it is for you to say that. I'd like to see you, Gerrit, if, assuming you ever watch this, I'd like to see you have the balls to go out in your preaching work, assuming you do preaching work, and say to people, until you join my religion and until you do what I tell you to do, you're obsessed with money. You're obsessed with wealth and accumulating material things. Please stop doing that. And the way to stop doing that is to do what I tell you to do. I'd like to see you have the balls to do that, Gerrit. I suspect you never will. It's easier to sell that line to a crowd of subservient followers who've already been indoctrinated to the point where that kind of reasoning makes sense.
Also, there seems to be a lack of trust in Jehovah that he will provide. Universities intend to promote this system of things, whereas we know the system of things will soon come to an end. Maybe you want to justify going to college. You say, see, brother so-and-so also went to college, and now he is a servant in the congregation and a pioneer, or even somebody may serve at Bethel. It may be, yes, that they survived college, true. But in a parallel, some may marry out of the truth and also still remain in the truth. But should you follow their example just because they survived in the truth? Some go to college and survive spiritually. As an illustration, here's a true-to-life experience that illustrates something. It's about a young man that had a compulsive disorder to constantly wash his hands about 100 times every day. And this discouraged him so much that he decided to take his life. He bought a rifle, put it in his mouth, and pulled the trigger. The bullet did not kill him, but went through the part of his brain that was responsible for his compulsive behavior. He survived and could carry on a normal life after that. Yes, he survived, but would you recommend such a behavior to others? For such procedure? Suppose you're on vacation at the bay, and the sign there says, danger, sharks. Then you learn that somebody swam across the bay and arrived at the other side safely. No shark attacked him. He survived. But would you be inclined to imitate that swimmer? It's a different question. Well, we want to commend those who were about to finish college education, but even stopped it when they, at that point, learned the truth. They wanted to put the kingdom first. Others, baptized ones, were offered free scholarships, but declined. What are you going to do as a young person? What decision will you make? Decline or not? Pursue college or not? Well, you have to answer to Jehovah.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is that's the clip that those are the clips that I wanted to share from Gerrit Loesch's talk yesterday at the Canadian branch visit. And wow, a man, and this is the most frustrating part of, or one of the most frustrating parts of this whole ridiculous story about the man who cures himself of OCD with a rifle. We have no way of corroborating this. You're not giving us any names. You're not giving us a source for where this story comes from. It could just have been made up. We have no way of knowing. it sounds like it very likely was made up. But again, if you're going to use this, particularly in the context of trying to persuade young people in 2018 not to go to college or university, where's your source, Gerrit? Why won't you give us your source? Why don't you say this is from such and such a newspaper or such and such a magazine? I've tried looking for it, incidentally, in Watchtower Library. I can't find it. Maybe if any of my viewers do find it, please do drop it in the comments below, but I can't find it anywhere. But to compare a mental disorder, I think I'm right in calling it a disorder. It's not something pleasant to have, OCD. To compare a mental disorder with wanting to better yourself by going to college or university is disgraceful. And then to further suggest that by going to college or university, what you're doing is the equivalent of trying to swim in shark-infested waters. It's very, very potent manipulation to be spewing out in front of young people. It's very distasteful, very manipulative, and shame on him for doing this. And what's even more infuriating is that, again, it's regurgitated. He keeps spilling this story out. He's been doing it for at least 5 years now. Goodness knows when he first started telling this grotesque story. But there's nothing original about it. He's not tailored this. The audience that's sitting there will be thinking, Gerrit's gone to the trouble of sitting down before this visit and he's put together some information especially for us. No, he hasn't. No, he hasn't. This is like he's like a stand-up comic who he goes to the same venue and just repeats the same line, and the audience thinks it's just for them. Only with a stand-up comic, the audience knows that the comic is doing a tour, and also within the space of maybe a year, the comic will move on to other material. Gerrit doesn't move on to other material. He repeats the same thing he was saying at least 5 years ago, again and again and again. And his final words there about his kind of chilling warning about, well, you try going to college or university and you'll have Jehovah to answer to. Absolutely shocking. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the reality of the Jehovah's Witness religion. And if you're watching this video as someone who's just interested in what happens with Jehovah's Witnesses, what they teach, what their religion is like, this is the reality you need to walk away with, that the leaders will sink to these depths to try and create a following that is dumbed down, that is subservient, that is reliant on them for their decision making, that basically is willing to capitulate their choices and their decisions so that Watchtower can micromanage their lives for them. And to even do it to the point of saying, well, your parents have ulterior motives. They're looking out for themselves in wanting you to go to college and university. It's just disgraceful, isn't it? So anyway, those were my thoughts on what Gerrit Loesch had to say about higher education yesterday in Canada. I hope you found this video interesting. Please don't forget to subscribe for more videos. And as always, thank you for watching.